So let's compare the output decisions of a perfectly competitive firm with that of a monopoly. So price takers, again, of course, cannot affect the price, whereas monopolies, they are price makers. They set the price by choosing their level of output, and specifically, they choose the level of output that maximizes their profit. All right, so let's see this here. Here we've got competitive firms on the left, and if you'll recall, their demand curve is basically a perfectly elastic, horizontally sloped demand curve. Whereas the monopoly, basically, since it's the only firm in the market, its demand curve is the market demand curve, and it's going to be a downward sloping demand curve. Now recall the profit maximizing rule. This rule is true for every type of firm, not just perfectly competitive firms, but for any type of firm. And recall that it's setting the quantity equal to where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So producing the quantity where marginal revenue of production equals marginal cost. Now under perfect competition, it was pretty straightforward. Marginal revenue was just the price determined in the market, the price that perfectly competitive firms took. This is not going to be the case with monopoly. With monopoly, the price that they charge is going to be higher. It's going to be greater than marginal revenue. All right, so here we got a demand schedule for a monopoly, as well as the total revenue generated from the demand. And then also the marginal revenue. Okay, so here we got the quantity over here, right, going up, price going down as quantity goes up, so illustrating our law of demand there. And then we've got revenue, total revenue, of course, which is just quantity times price, so just multiplying these two columns together to get total revenue. And then, of course, marginal revenue is just the change in total revenue. So finding the difference, right? So the difference here going from zero to $90,000. The change is $90,000. That one's pretty easy. Going from $90,000 to $160K. The change is $70,000. So that's where this marginal revenue is coming from. It's just the difference between any two given total revenue rows, right? All right, so what we can see here, and let's see, where is profit maximized? Right here at a quantity of 5,000 units. All right, so a question you might have asked yourself is, why does total revenue increase and then decrease? So let me go back real quick. So you see the total revenue right here goes up and then it goes down. Right, so hopefully you recall from the chapter on elasticity, this has to do with elasticity, right? The fact that total revenue is the product of quantity and price, and these things are moving in opposite directions. As one goes up, the other goes down. Okay, so here, recall that we have the elastic region at the top of the demand curve, and as price comes down, revenue goes up. Let's see, right here is going to be our unit elastic point right in the middle. And then here's our inelastic region where as price goes down, total revenue goes down. So recall from the elasticity chapter the relationship between elasticity and total revenue. But that's basically what's going on here. Okay. So there's the price effect, right? So the price effect, as we bring the price down, right, that's going to have a negative impact on total revenue. So by itself, that would constitute a loss or a loss in revenue, a decrease in revenue for the firm. But then that's offset by the output effect. So as the price comes down, more is sold, right? So by itself, the output effect constitutes a gain or increase in revenue. So that's what we're seeing here. And again, it's related to elasticity. Okay, so here's what the demand curve and the marginal revenue curve looked like from our table. So as it turns out, the marginal revenue curve has the same intercept as the demand curve, but it crosses the quantity axis halfway between the demand curve and the origin. So it's basically just halfway between demand and the origin there. So this is what marginal revenue looks like. It's a downward sloping curve, and it's below the demand curve. All right, so to illustrate the price effect and quantity effect, as we go from a price of 70 to a price of 60, right, that would constitute a decrease or a loss in revenue by itself. But then we have the output effect. So there's an increase in the quantity sold, and so that by itself constitutes an increase in revenue. And so as we can see here, going from a price of 70 to a price of 60, the net change in revenue is positive $30,000. So there's an increase in revenue of $30,000 when going from a price of 70 to a price of 60. All right, so looking at our graph, we're going to begin by looking at where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. Okay, and those two curves intersect right there. Now that tells the monopoly how much it should produce to maximize profit. So in this case, 1,000 units will maximize the monopoly's profit. But that's not the end of the story. Now the firm needs to determine how much to charge in order to sell that 1,000 units. And in order to do that, it goes up from that quantity up to the demand curve and then over to the price axis, right? So $50 in this case is going to be the price that allows the firm to sell 1,000 units, which is where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So this is the profit maximizing price quantity combination. Now if we want to figure out the monopolist's profit, we need to add in our average total cost curve, and at that quantity of 1,000 units, the average total cost is $35, and there is our profit. There's the monopoly's profit, right? So it disappeared, right? But that's the quantity 1,000. And if we go up from that quantity up to the average total cost curve, that gives us the average total cost of producing 1,000 units. Now, if that's the average total cost, and this is the price, that difference there, right, is profit per unit, right? Price, cost, the difference is profit per unit. And then if we multiply that by the number of units, we get total profit, right? So that's why that area is profit. Now suppose the average total cost curve was higher, right? Now in this case, we'd do the same thing. We'd go from the quantity up to the average total cost curve to figure out the average cost per unit. In this case, it's $65 per unit. And since the firm, the monopoly, is only able to charge $50 per unit, in this case, they're going to make a loss, right? So now, basically, we've got a loss because we've got price minus average cost. That's going to be a negative number. It's going to be negative $15 per unit. And then we multiply that by the total number of units sold, and that we get our total loss there as that rectangle. So what you'll notice, let's see, let me go back here a second. What you'll notice is that when the average total cost curve crosses below the demand curve, the monopoly will make a profit. But when it's up above the demand curve, the monopoly will make a loss. So that's an easy way to visually see right away whether the monopoly is making a profit or a loss. All right, so now that we've seen what it looks like in our graph, let's again compare and contrast perfect competition with monopoly. So again, many firms with competitive markets, we've got an efficient level of output, and this is because it turns out that price equals marginal cost. It also turns out in the long run that price equals the minimum of average total cost. So costs are minimized in competitive markets, whereas in monopoly, the price that the monopoly is charging is greater than marginal costs. So this leads to an inefficiency, as it turns out. Now, for competitive markets in the long run, there are zero economic profits in the long run for competitive firms, but not for monopoly. The monopoly can actually earn long-run economic profits. So that's pretty interesting and seems intuitive, in fact, with what most of us know generally about monopolies. And then the last thing here is that competitive firms have no market power. They are price takers, whereas monopolies have significant market power, right? Monopoly power. They determine the price that they're going to charge, of course, using the profit maximizing rule. All right, so let's get a little practice here. Take a little break and get some practice. What is true for a profit maximizing monopoly? If you need to, pause the video for a second, think about it. Okay, so hopefully you concluded that the answer is C, right? Price is greater than marginal revenue, which is equal to marginal cost. So you could have eliminated B and D because in those cases, marginal revenue is not equal to marginal cost. And so B and D would mean that the firm in that case is not profit maximizing, so you could eliminate those. And then as we just saw, price is greater than marginal cost, right, for monopolies. So correct answer is C.